And parents need to beware that it's no longer just Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, but it's our alma maters. And you at least know what to expect from Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. But if you send your kids off to our Christian colleges and you've not done your homework and wonder why you paid twice the tuition for them to go there than a state school and they still came out trans, that's because the infiltration and the revolution has made it all the way into our churches. Gender theory, critical queer theory, where there were more middle schoolers, self-identifying as trans than there are middle schoolers in existence. I mean, it's like, wow, is something in the water? Or is this just an ideological social contagion that also made its way through TikTok? But where all of this stuff began was on the college campus, and it's still there, and the residue is still in the churches.
We've got a listener in Missouri, Heather, who we want to say thank you to. Heather, we are so grateful for your financial support of the work of MAVEN.
Yeah, it's supporters like you, Heather, that make this podcast possible and all the things we do at MAVEN. So thank you so much for your generosity. We appreciate you.
Well, our primary audience here at the MAVEN Parent Podcast is its parents, it's pastors, church leaders, youth workers, it's grandparents, it's educators. It's basically stakeholders in the discipleship of the next generation. And so these are folks that are going to be sending their kids into the university eventually. And so that's why today's interview is so important. Corey Miller has written an important book entitled The Progressive Miseducation of America. Hey, Corey, thank you for taking some time to talk with us about your new book.
Hey, it is so fun to be on here with both of you, Brett and Erin. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, for those of you who don't know Corey is the president of Ratio Christi, which is a campus apologetics evangelism ministry on more than 100 different campuses across the world, not just in the U.S. Corey, you were born in Utah, 7th generation Mormon. You've got ancestors who were polygamists, and you got some deep roots there, which we'll hear a little bit about. You got 3 master's degrees and a PhD from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. You've taught on philosophy, religion, and you are the author of 4 books, and or is it 5 now? Is this the 5th book?
This would be 6th.
6th. This is the 6th book. The Progressive Miseducation of America. So that is who Corey is. He is well qualified to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm. So Corey, one of your books is about leaving Mormonism, but we just have to talk to you about that before we talk about your new book, because I think MAVEN does what we call immersive experiences with students,
right.
And one of the trips we do is training students in Christian theology and Mormon theology, and then we take them to Utah. And actually, we interact with Ratio Christi students and staff members of yours in Utah. Of course, they're doing good work there, so we partner with them.
We've partnered on a trip with Ratio Christi years ago, and now Ratio Christi is also doing some of that having students come and do some stuff in Utah.
Yeah, so we love Ratio Christi and what you're doing, but I just want you to tell the audience, how did you leave? 7 generations of Mormons from your family, all the way to Joseph Smith. Yeah. It is a miracle. And I say that truly, that you came out of that. And so I would love for you to share your story of how you came to faith in Christ.
Sure, and I'm so glad you guys go to Utah. That's so fun. I think we are going to be doing our national conference there next June. So thankful for you guys, your ministry, taking kids there. I think it lights people up because Utah has these exotic creatures there called Mormons, different from anywhere else in the country. So
yes.
Yeah, my background, raised 7th gen. My family tell me that I come from healthy stock, and what that means is that my 6th gen had 5 wives and 36 children, of which I'm a descendant. So he was a bodyguard of Joseph Smith, a colonel in the Mormon battalion at the time when the U.S. Army was Actually, the Mormon battalion was about 3/5 the size of the U.S. Army, and there was a possibility of them going to war. The seventh gen, he sided with the very first splinter group ever when Joseph Smith was trying to take other men's wives and make them his own. And this man and his brother, who was a general in the Mormon battalion, this man was a second counselor, which is among the top echelons of the first presidency. Joseph Smith tried to assign his wife. And that guy said, no thanks, buddy. I'm going out on my own. You are an apostate. We're going to have our first splinter group ever. And my sixth gen ancestor said, you know what, Dad, no thank you. You can go with the Law family. I'm staying with Prophet Smith. And to show my loyalty, I'm taking 5 wives, populating the earth with 36 children. So my family goes back to the very first and highest level splinter group ever. And so it's a fascinating story for me because I didn't even know all of that stuff until probably my second book on Mormonism. I wrote 3 books, and I was finding out more information as I went along. So it's kind of interesting for me as a history buff, and I bore my kids with it. But every time we go back, we have to go to the gravesite and see where Brigham Young and John Taylor spoke at my sixth gen's funeral there. So kind of interesting. But yes, I leave the other wives back in Utah and just have one with me in Indiana.
So
we're grateful for that.
Yeah. So you grow up in a committed Mormon family. What's your story of coming to Christ, coming out of that, and then coming to Christ?
And that word committed, I would say both 5 generations back on one side, 7 on the other. But my mom and dad were the respective black sheep of their own family lines. And so they never married. I'm a product of one night, essentially.
Oh,
and
wow.
I continued to be raised in Mormonism, especially by both of my grandparents. And one of them, high up in the LDS church at the local level. And I loved it. It was part of my community. But what happened was, I think because my mom, who I grew up with, was a smoker, and that's a definite no-no. That's going to get you banned from the celestial kingdom. Because she was a smoker, we were poor. And I just feel like in my social demographic in the ward that I attended, I found a lot of people who were unsavory, treated me differently. I felt ostracized. And so at a certain age, even though I struggled for righteousness, had the CTR ring, got baptized, and delayed it until I was 9, wanting to be absolutely sure of this because I was taught 2 different things, and you guys are surely familiar with popular Mormonism, which teaches try your best, and God will make up the rest. And the Book of Mormon, authentic Mormonism, when it comes to salvation, you've got to get right with God in this lifetime or else. I knew this, and I knew if I got baptized, it would wash away my sins. I would have a clean slate. But then every sin after that was a check mark on my tablet, and what am I going to do? So I figured as an 8-year-old, I would beat the system, and I would wait until I was 88 years old and then get baptized and go into celestial glory. But I thought,
seems
what if
logical.
I get, yeah, as an 8-year-old, but what if I get hit by a semi-truck, having failed to be baptized by the proper priestly authority? And so I capitulated at age 9. But be that as it may, a couple of years later, I'm just not fitting in. And so while I continued with the theology of Mormonism, I was now rejecting the sociology of Mormonism. I wanted to find people who would love me, and it turned out to be a bad crowd. Well, I spent a couple of years in adolescence doing the rebellious life. And then a friend from your neck of the woods down in California invited me to his dad's house, and I could spend the whole summer there if I went to this camp called Hume Lake Christian Camp. And when I got there, the preacher spoke on hell, and I tell people that it scared the hell out of me and heaven into me. And then so transformative was it that I went back to Utah, packed my bags, and my mom, single parent, she either allowed me or I don't know, somehow it happened, but I ended up moving to California, to the Bay Area, where I spent the next year of my life, my junior year of high school, being discipled by a youth pastor that I'm still friends with, by the friends in that youth group. One of them is now the senior pastor, and I was just talking with him today, so I'm still connected with them. But I spent my junior year there and got grounded in real Christian faith, real discipleship, saw what it looked like to have a Christian father in the home, siblings in the home. When I got back my senior year of high school, that's when the problems began, because now I'm being challenged by my extended family, my grandparents, my friends, a girlfriend that I should not have hung on to, that I needed to reread the Book of Mormon this time for the sake of truth and not just tradition. Because at this time, I had literally, and I write this in my new book, I have a report card that shows that I had a 0.666 on my GPA. So kids at home, if I can do it, you can do it. But I had no interest in truth or knowledge. I was just cruising through life at the time. And now, when I realized after reading the Book of Mormon how problematic it was, the first time really reading it from a critical viewpoint, it made me now wonder if my entire existential conversion experience wasn't built on problems as well, because I had always been taught we believe the Bible is true as far as it's translated correctly, which means it's not. But it didn't matter because we had living apostles and prophets, and so we could all just punt to them. But now I no longer believed in those foundational authorities. What about this foundational authority? What about the Bible? How do I know it's God's word? How do I know it's historically reliable? How do I know if God even exists? And if so, which God? And that sent me into skepticism for a little while. And then I came across this thing called Christian apologetics. And then I was off to the races for the next 30 years in philosophy, comparative religions, and apologetics.
Wow. So that kind of started your intellectual journey, really, being able to try to answer some of the challenges of Mormonism.
Yeah, I do not think I would have had an intellectual journey if it weren't part of that as the explanation. But also, on the other end of the coin, Jesus said, here is eternal life, to know God. And so knowledge for the Christian isn't something that is peripheral. It's essential for the Christian experience. And suddenly, as I'm knowing God, knowledge itself took on a new meaning and something that I could not get enough of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now that's one of the reasons why we take young people to Utah, because we find that it is it's one of the best ways to get high school and college students interested and to feel the need for theological training, doctrinal training, apologetic training, because you can hand a kid a theology book or an apologetics book and say, here, you really need to read this. It's another thing when a kid goes out, starts engaging with a Mormon who seems to know the Bible better than they do, kind of rips them apart. And then those students come back and they're like, where's that book? I need resources.
That's right.
And so that's one of the reasons why we do these the MAVEN immersive experiences to Utah, because it really can awaken students to the need for knowing what they believe and why they believe it. So, okay, so that gets you going in this direction. How do you get involved in then the intellectual work you're doing at Ratio Christi, and give our audience a little bit of an overview of what you guys are doing through Ratio Christi, because we want them to know, hey, there are resources out there on secular campuses like Ratio that their students can get involved with.
Yeah, so I found a group of people that were kind of like me, ages 18 through 21 in Utah, and we just carved our teeth on Ray Comfort and the law and the gospel, and always went downtown doing street evangelism, getting carried out physically from the Salt Lake Temple, going up to the University of Utah, which I absolutely loved and thought one day maybe the university. Well, I thought maybe I should go to college. I like to teach. I like the Bible now. Went to the Army. I've got my combat boots up there to show it. And got the GI Bill and ended up going to Bible college up in the Northwest. And spent some time up there, got a master's degree. But my heart of hearts was beating for evangelism. God had given me a heart for evangelism and a mind for strategy. And so I kept seeing things like the university, like my experience at Salt Lake Community College. My first class ever, I got kicked out for doing some apologetics evangelism. During my oral project, I was going to do an altar call, Ray Comfort style. It was radical back then. I saw, John the Baptist getting all crazy on people, and I'm just a new Christian, and so I'm thinking that's what we should all do. But I went straight away to the Rutherford Institute, who forced the university president to let me back in the classroom and give me an A as long as I shut up for the semester. So I did. I loved that. I loved the engagement. I ended up at Multnomah Bible College, University, and Seminary. Came on staff at 2 churches while I was up there, but I had to transition. I needed to be doing evangelism. I was getting claustrophobia in the church. And I saw what was happening at the universities and always thought about the Trojan horse entering into the city of Troy. Took a decade to try to broach those walls unsuccessfully until they figured out some trick. And so the trick for me was I need to transition out of Bible and get into philosophy, where I can go into the secular baptismal font, as it were, and advance the cause of Christ on truth, beauty, and goodness, and defend our own. And so I needed a new degree, a new path. And so I went down to Southern California to Talbot, did their MA in philosophy, went back to Oregon, pastoral studies some more. Why? Because I couldn't, for a while, I wasn't ready to go off for a PhD yet, but I could not get any church jobs. It seemed like churches almost despised. The more education I had, the harder it was to get even a youth pastor job again. And so finally, my last round of applications, I landed it. I was going to be adjunct faculty at Multnomah, and now I was going to be a college high school pastor up in Oregon. So we took a couple more years off up in Oregon, and the claustrophobia set in again. And I was getting sick of seeing my top students go off to University of Pennsylvania and other universities, coming back for Christmas break with their brains hanging out. And I would try to stuff it back in, and then they would come back another semester, and they were done with it. And they reported to mom and dad, Mom, Dad, I figured out, 2 things that I had been told. One, that Santa exists, figured that one out on my own. And on the other knee, it was that God exists. And it took me to get to where all the smart people were, all the people with PhDs. And Christmas will never be the same again. I'll still be home for Christmas, but I don't see things the way you guys saw it. That just drove me with a passion. I needed to go with the Trojan horse. I needed to get into the city of Troy. I needed to get a secular university PhD. And so I got accepted at Purdue University. And that took me out here 20 years ago. It was supposed to be only 5 years, but God never got the memo. So here I am in Cornland, still here. And I lost my first PhD attempt. When I thought I was being clandestine, my wife said, Trojan horse, my foot. I was getting prank calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, mocking me from my faith from Marxist colleagues in a Marxist class that I was taking from a distinguished professor of Marxism, which I later got published in, and I could finally see what was coming down the pike. And I think as a result, it was providential because we were the first ministry in the country, even though I wasn't with Ratio Christi yet, to get anything out on literature, as far as I know, long before George Floyd hit and COVID and so forth, on critical theory. I could smell this stuff coming down, and I lost my first PhD. I was told I had too much of a faith perspective. At that same time, I now wanted to go after professors. I was studying under William Rowe, a famous atheist professor, who wrote me a letter of recommend to get into a second PhD program if I wanted to go on. I got accepted by Campus Crusade's faculty ministry, and so I began continued teaching at Indiana University in philosophy and comparative religions, while launching or taking over the faculty ministry with Campus Crusade at Purdue. And then I launched my second attempt at a PhD from the University of Aberdeen, where I got in trouble there because the guy who was the first trans philosopher in the UK an Augustinian philosopher himself, was the external examiner for my defense. And I feel like I barely passed that. And I was now not happy with God's sense of humor, but he was taking me through the ringer for a reason. And I had a former pastor who turned gay, charged me with creating a suicidal environment when I was a professor at Indiana University, right at the same time that I was getting ready to defend my dissertation in Scotland. And that was another one where Alliance Defending Freedom had to come in, take my case pro bono, and two of my atheist students came in my defense as well and threatened the university that even though they disagree with their professors, my view of God and sexuality, they had recorded all of my lectures on a flash drive and I had done nothing wrong. If they don't at least listen to my lectures before firing me, then that would tell them it's not a free-thinking university and they're going to transfer from Indiana University to some other school. So long story short, I faced off with the legal challenges as an undergrad at Salt Lake Community College, as a professor at Indiana University, and as a PhD student at Purdue University. I finally finished my PhD from Aberdeen, and 2 months later, this organization named Ratio Christi called me up and they said, we have a job opening. I was desperate for a job. I said, I'll take it. What is it? They told me, and I didn't know anything about President, and they didn't know much about me. So I guess it was a happy move together. That was 10 years ago. And since then, we've had 130 legal inquiries, 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, and we gave Joe Biden a nice victory for the Department of Education in December before he left office.
Well, I'm so glad that you share a little bit of your history, Corey. And I had a couple thoughts. Number one, you really are in a mission field here in the U.S., the American University. This is a mission field that we need to send more people into. And I'm just thinking, you know, the work that you're doing, the work that Ratio Christi is doing on college campuses needs to be supported by the church, because this is a mission field. And we have got to equip people intellectually to engage in that arena. And so I'm just so glad you kind of, you know, recounted your journey into that mission field. Mm-hmm. And as people hear that, wanting them to think, okay, how do we support these kinds of efforts? Because Ratio Christi is doing such important work.
Yeah, and we've got a college prep organization too, which is our undergrad. About 20 chapters there, 100 that are undergrad college students across the U.S. We're in about 15 countries internationally. We've got a professor's division, and now we've got a PhD student-only division that we are funding clandestinely chapters in the top 100 schools, where we fund them and they launch missional professor chapters at that level, so that in 40 or 50 years from now, this is a game plan to reclaim, like a Normandy Beach style landing, the universities, along with what I write about in my book. The book was originally titled The Third Revolution, From the Campus to the Culture and a Vision Forward. I still like it, but the publisher, it's their book. I'm just the author.
Hey, now real quick, someone wants to find out more about Ratio Christi. Where do they go?
RatioChristi.org, like mathematical ratio, RATIO, Christ with an I.org.
Okay, and we'll put that link in the show notes so people can find what you guys are doing.
Okay,
yeah,
so
thanks.
Corey, you're describing you're using battle language already and talking about dropping people in and and in the book you talk about that there is a revolution going on. And I think most parents and youth pastors and leaders understand that the culture has changed. You say it's not our grandma's, how do you say it in the book? It's not our grandma's culture anymore. I definitely realize that, like hearing my grandmas talk about the America that they grew up in and how different things are today. even from when I grew up too, compared to now raising 5 kids in this culture. But what you say, there's a revolution going on, and that, you know, you're encouraging us through the book to see it that way, and then that informs how we act in it. But maybe talk about that. What revolution's going on in the culture?
Yeah, so I do use a lot of military metaphors as someone prior military, but I think about that strategically, and I don't mean it violently. Right. I mean ideological revolutions. You have agnostics today like Tom Holland, who calls himself a Christian agnostic. Others calling themselves Christian atheists, Christian gay atheists, Christian existentialist Christians, cultural Christians. It's like cool now for Richard Dawkins and Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson and other people now to look on Christianity with intrigue and interest again, after some of them tried to douse it and get rid of it. So if we look at what Tom Holland wrote about the Jesus Revolution that launched how the West is best 2,000 years ago, we started these things called the universities, and not just in America, but going all the way back to Europe. We're going to be taking a group over to Europe next semester. We will land in Greece and go to Plato's Academy. If you guys want to come with, go straight from there to Aristotle's Lyceum, and then we go to Corinth. Please. And we're going to show people how the Western world developed, but more importantly, how academia developed, and how it was the Christian world and no other that really put boots on that, and for good worldview reasons. It wasn't just a historical accident, but it was part of the DNA of Christianity, a worldview that begins with mind and not with matter, for example. And so we started all of these universities, and right after the Pilgrims landed, they ate some turkey, had a great Thanksgiving, and then about 15 years later started Harvard. And for nearly 300 years, they kept slight modifications. Their motto was truth for Christ and the church. And we started Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. And for the first 200 years, these institutions were all Protestant universities whose presidents were also members of the clergy. And by 1880, church and chapel attendance were still required. So this was a very different place. It was a different place just 15 years ago, 10 years ago. If you've not been on a university campus in the last 5 years, you would not recognize it. I tell people now the Democratic Party in the last 10 years since 2015 is not the same Democratic Party as the last 100 years before that, because suddenly we have this transhumanist Elon Musk populating the earth, doing his part with 13 illegitimate children, a lifetime Democrat who's now a Republican. You've got Donald Trump, who's now a Republican. You have 2 recent Democratic presidential candidates, including a Kennedy, who are now on the Republican platform of the cabinet. You've got Richard Dawkins, who would probably vote Republican. My old partner in crime, Peter Boghossian, we did a speaking tour together, started in 2019. I think he voted Republican this last time. And the culture is radically different. No longer grandma's America. And I chart that out in the first third of the book by showing everything from academia to the corporate world to media to churches to campus ministries, Christian academic societies, seminaries, and so forth. It is in every flora and fauna. The barbarians are no longer at the gates. They're in the citadels. And that is the case because the first revolution, which ended in 1930, we sent I hope I'm not talking too much. I want to give some background for this. That first revolution was 1880 to 1930. We had no PhD programs in the U.S., so we sent them over to Germany. And that's where you had Kant and Schleiermacher, the father of agnosticism, the father of modern liberal theology. You had Hegel, you had Marx, Engels, Freud, Nietzsche, biblical higher criticism. And all of our best and brightest would go over there, and they would come back now with PhDs. And the battle was on in Yale, Princeton, Harvard, and so forth. And they won. And they kicked us out. And the conservatives had to move from Princeton to Westminster. And then we started Calvin and Wheaton and Biola. And at that time in 1930, when the dust was settling, some other nefarious plot was happening once again in Germany, which is why we're taking a tour over there to give people a three-dimensional look at this. And that was this movement of Marxism in this city called Frankfurt, the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. We now think about critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical pedagogy, critical queer theory. If it starts with critical and it's not critical thinking, run as fast as you can because it's Marx plus whatever else it is. And at that time, these Jewish leaders of the movement, who were also new Marxists, neo-Marxists, were fighting for the seat of power in Germany. They were all socialists, but whether you were a national socialist or a globalist socialist, a nationalist that liked the guy with, the little mustache guy, blonde hair and blue eyes, or if you were globalists like Antifa, anti-fascists. Well, we know who won in 1933. The little mustache guy rose to power. And if you're Jewish and you're a globalist, you had to get out of town. So they went over to Columbia, Brandeis, UCLA, and other schools. And right below them in Italy was this perhaps most dangerous cultural Marxist, Antonio Gramsci. Never got out of prison, but his prison notes got mediated to the Western world, to the English world, through a scholar at Notre Dame right here in Indiana, a Marxist professor named Joseph Buttigieg, father of Mayor Pete. So that's not just homosexuality, that's critical queer theory there. And with both of them, and then within 15 years, the founders of postmodernism began, like Lyotard and Derrida, deconstructionism, deconstruct the faith, and Foucault. And all of those guys ended up, they were card-carrying members of the French Communist Party as well. So you might look at this as the Axis power of Marxism, including what, if you will, the Vichy government in France. And all of their best leaders for the first and second generation came over to our top universities and taught here. And that second revolution was underway. And I don't need to go into all the detail, though I can if you want. They took us through the 60s, and finally we get up to now where we're at. And I'm arguing for the need for a third revolution.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying here and kind of looking back at the history is so important, especially if you are a parent, a church leader, a Christian educator, and you are about to send your kids into a secular university for the next 4 or 5 years to be educated. It might be important to know the history, the intellectual history of that institution that you're sending them to. And that's why what you're saying here is so important. And so part one of your book, Erin mentioned it, right? The title is, part one is called What Just Happened, No Longer Grandma's America. Mm-hmm. And this is an important part of your book, because here's where you're kind of prosecuting the case. You're laying out for everyone, these are the ideas that your young people are going to face in the university. Chapter 1 is Woke 101. You explain wokeness and talk about that. Chapter 2 is a case of sexualized and genderized insanity. Chapter 3 is on the race revolution. Chapter 4 is entitled Math and Medicine Swoon Under the Spell. And then chapter 5 is Christian Ministries and Mission Drift. So now, obviously, we can't cover all of that, but give our audience a little bit of a flavor of, hey, your young people going into a secular university, here are the ideas that they are going to face, and they're going to need to be equipped. If we don't want to lose them, they're going to need to be equipped to deal with some of this stuff. So maybe take that first part and give us some maybe specific examples, summarize that for us.
So the first revolution brought about, it was scientific naturalism. And the way that it took over for about 100 years was that every department started to change their names. Politics, which was always a part of ethics, a subset of ethics, now was called political science. Psychology, which literally means the study of the soul, was now about the brain and the central nervous system. And so its name changed, as it is at Purdue, the Department of Psychological Sciences. Everybody wanted to be part of the sciences. And so for the next 100 years, if you weren't a science affiliate somehow or other, you just need to go in the closet and have faith, and that's all. Well, with this, and so we get scientific naturalism. That brought about liberal Protestant theology, and the way that it impacted the churches is it gave us the social gospel, moral do-gooders, if you will. Church, the food pantries and do good, be moral, but it wasn't about the immortality of the soul or conversion to Christ, thinking from an eternal perspective. The second one that came about was built on that, but it was a postmodern, kind of a relativism mixing with a new kind of cultural Marxism that was applied now not just to the haves and have-nots of class warfare, economic haves and have-nots in communism, but it was now to every social category, to cultural categories like race, class, sex, gender, ethnicity, nationality, and so forth. And so now the goal of the cultural Marxists was to successfully get into the West and have a revolution. One couldn't do what they did in the East, like the Russian and Chinese revolutions. Instead of a frontal assault, they had to get into the soft tissue of culture, and that is into academia, media, and ecclesia, into the churches. And that's what they've been doing. So in the 90s, I need to say that the ratio of liberal to conservative professors was about 2.3 to 1 in the secular universities. That is still very severe once you line up 100 professors, 2.3 to 1. But over the next 25, 30 years, it is now 12 to 1 for those of a retiring age, 23 to 1 for those that just got tenure and have another 30 years ahead of them, 27 to 1 if you want your kids to go to an Ivy League school, good luck. And at Yale, just about a month or two ago, they said that the statistics for their social sciences and humanities is 78 to 1. These are not places of viewpoint diversity. They are ideological monoliths, and this new revolutionary guard, the postmodern cultural Marxism, has taken over not just in the humanities and social sciences, but through DEI, or as I would call them, DIE programs. It jumped over into math, medicine, and engineering, and then everything goes from campus to culture, and it quickly came out into the corporate world, into K through 12 education, into the churches, the campus ministries, into seminaries, and so forth. And so everything we've been dealing with over the last 5 years and feeling such anxiety and conflict over, like critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical queer theory, where there were more middle schoolers self-identifying as trans than there are middle schoolers in existence. I mean, it's like, wow, is something in the water? Or is this just an ideological social contagion that also made its way through TikTok? But where all of this stuff began was on the college campus, and it's still there, and the residue is still in the churches. And so when parents are thinking about this is where in 2019, I was invited by atheist philosopher Peter Boghossian to be a guest lecturer in his atheism seminar at Portland State University, where I would give arguments for God's existence, and then he would train his students, of course, to take me down. And then we went and had lunch after, and he proposed an alliance. An alliance? What do you mean? He said, well, you guys are already out, but if you go, we go. If we go, you go. We need each other. I'm done with this atheism-theism debate that was part of the New Atheists that I was part of. My whole career from now on is going to be geared toward destroying critical theory and social justice, because this is about civilization. And I think you guys need to stop doing apologetics. If you need me to talk to your board, I will. No one wants to hear about talking snakes anymore anyway, but we need each other. And so I said, okay, we'll launch a limited partnership. But remember, it was your guys' side that started this. And now you guys created this goo that evolved into Frankenstein, and you can't control it anymore. And so now you want to be friends. So we'll be friends. And we launched a lecture tour beginning in Utah at Weber State and Utah State and University of Utah. And we even lectured on viewpoint diversity at Utah Valley University, where Charlie Kirk was just assassinated. And then COVID hit, and George Floyd was killed, and all of the things that followed that. And so the tour stopped. But we were on to that, both of us. Him, a liberal atheist, a friend of scientific naturalism, me, a conservative Christian philosopher and theologian. We both saw an enemy worse than each other out there on the horizon coming very fast. And now it's here. And he said it's unsustainable. It cannot be sustained. And I said, Pete, you have no idea how lodged this is going to be into the churches. It just hit there. And because the churches have this idea of original sin and God hates oppression, and this whole thing divides people up into oppressors and oppressee, victims and victimizers, haves and have-nots. And the Christian says God is love and Jesus is love, and so love is love, and hate or celebrate. Once it gets into the churches, just like the cultural Marxists said they needed to do, it's going to be a long time rooting that out. And so now I find myself having better friends among sometimes liberal atheists than Christian pastors or seminaries and so forth, because it is this illiberal cancel culture, cultural Marxism, that has swept in to, say, the Democratic Party, and kicked many of them out. If they didn't get conscripted, they've now gone to the Republican Party. And you've seen it happen in the churches, into the campus ministries. And I'm fine naming names now because we're in a culture war here, and parents need to beware that it's no longer just Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, but it's our alma maters. And you at least know what to expect from Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. But if you send your kids off to our Christian colleges and you've not done your homework and wonder why you paid twice the tuition for them to go there than a state school, and they still came out trans, that's because the infiltration and the revolution has made it all the way into our churches.
Hey, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa listening. We have some ideas for you for the upcoming summer. Now you're thinking, Erin, we haven't even got through the holidays and you're talking about the summer. Well, with the holidays coming and thinking about something you can do for your child or grandchild for this upcoming summer is what we want you to start thinking about. And that's thinking about their spiritual formation, their worldview formation, and being purposeful with your money and pushing that towards helping your child develop a Christian worldview with some world-class training this summer.
And we've got just the thing for you. One of our ministry partners is Impact 360. And next summer, Impact 360 has 2 camps. They have a 1-week camp called Propel and a 2-week camp called Immersion. Now, here's the bad news. Immersion is filled up. Here's the good news. Propel is not. And in fact, think beyond just 2026. Think about the next few summers that you have your high school kid at home and you can offer them this kind of training. If you get into Propel, you have a greater chance of then getting into Immersion. And so this coming summer, you've got Propel as a 1-week option where your kid is going to get worldview and apologetic training that they are probably not getting in their typical youth group or the typical Christian school. Send them to Propel for that 1 week. They will come back just lit up. In fact, our own kids have gone to Propel. And then that will set you up for the future summers to get into the 2-week program, which is called Immersion. So there's your plan, parents. Next summer, send your kids to Impact 360's Propel 1-week worldview camp. Go to impact360institute.org to sign up.
Yeah, and I love how you're walking us through the shift in ideas and thinking, because oftentimes parents and grandparents of today are kind of scratching their heads going, how did we get to this place where young people they're not comfortable with saying they're male or female? And the tendency is to think, well, this young generation has gone a little crazy. But what you describe in your book and what you just did right now is, oh no, these ideas have been around for a long time. And they have been spoon-fed to university students for a long time. And now just what we're seeing is the ideas coming to fruition in popular culture. And so we can't just actually look at the young people. We can't look to them and say, oh, this is all their fault. You know, our generation, we weren't this crazy. Well, our generation was adopting these ideas too, and we were starting to shift back then as well. And I think Corey, you know, what you talked about with the universities were founded by Christians, and this shift that we have made in the church away from a knowledge tradition, thinking of Christianity as a knowledge tradition, and now, like Francis Schaeffer says, we've divided it and put it in another floor of the house, right? And so now it's just a faith tradition.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, go to school, study to be a doctor. That has actually nothing to do with your Christianity. Your Christianity just is up in that upper floor. You keep that up there. And we find ourselves just trying to convince people, no, Christianity is actually a knowledge tradition. And when we give up on that, and even the way we talk about Christianity with our kids, if we aren't talking to them about the fact that Christianity is a worldview that is talking about reality, just that is something we don't do in our churches anymore.
Yeah, and it's you're exactly right on that, Erin. In the first revolution, its view was scientific naturalism, but its theory of knowledge then became scientism, where science is the be-all, end-all of knowledge. In the second revolution, it was built on that, but it had a new platform of postmodern cultural Marxism, and its theory of knowledge we call woke, and that's a different form of the eyes opening up to enlightenment. They're only enlightened, they're only opened up if you are a member of the oppressed class. In this category, you're the oppressed, Brett is the oppressor. He may not think that, you may not think that, but by the nature of the case, he's part of the patriarchy. You're both white, so you're both oppressors there. You might be capitalist, you might be Christians, and so you're heterosexual, so you've got heteronormativity oppression. You've got theistic normativity, which is what our opponents on the campus, the Secular Student Alliance, is now calling it theistic normativity. And so other people who are white, male, heterosexual, Christian, or whatever, they can't see it. They're blinded to it. This is it's an esoteric, secret kind of knowledge that only comes about if you are oppressed. And that's why when it comes to finding out the diverse groups of oppressor-oppressed groups, once we decide to practice inclusivity, we need to exclude the oppressors like Brett and include only the woman voices like Erin's here, because only she truly knows. He can't help but know. He should listen, learn, and lament. And then the Eve in the DIE category, from reality to knowledge and ethics, the ethics is social justice. What are we going to do to reverse this power privilege imbalance? This is where we do reparations, revenge, payback. We right the wrong, the inequality that's there, so that everybody is now equal, not just in income, but in power and privilege along race, class, sex, gender. So it is a knowledge category, and we have to be training our kids to see that this is not a faith tradition in the sense that it's blind or barren, but it's a knowledge tradition in which the biblical notion of faith is reasonable and fruitful. And in fact, that's what the other side is now seeing. The former scientific naturalists, the liberals, the relativists. And so Elon Musk now wants to say, I'm a cultural Christian. Richard Dawkins now wants to say, I'm a cultural Christian. And he loves the Christian apples at the supermarket, and he would love just to buy them forever. But he thinks that you can just get these apples, the fruit, at the supermarket without getting the root, which is Christianity. And you just can't have that. And that's where we come in now. And I think we have an open window for both the cultural morass that we felt for the last 5 years, where what Charlie Kirk's wife would call the lost boys of the West are so sick of being blasted as toxic, as masculine, as part of the problem. And suddenly they're making a shift toward conservatism, toward church, or whatever. We don't know who they're following. Are they going to follow Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan? Are they going to follow Nick Fuentes and with his anti-Semitism now with the woke right? Or Andrew Tate?
Andrew Tate, yeah,
puts on his wife beater shirt and reacts against feminism that way? Or is it going to be someone like a Charlie Kirk, right? And so we don't know exactly what's happening with that shift. We just know it's happening. And we need this time to be able to capture that audience. And it happens to be that apologetics is very interesting to males. More people in our chapters are male than female. You can say what you want about that, but our culture has opened up. And with the Charlie Kirk moment being a global phenomenon, suddenly there's a revival in town, and our university chapters can feel it. One of our campuses is seeing 10 to 15 students saved per week. But like all revivals, they come and they go. They are short-lived. We need a strategy to get back into the source of the problems. The parents and the pastors that I address in the last section of the book, they need to do their job. But we need a strategy to stop putting chlorine downstream into politics as if that's the be-all, end-all, because we're feeling good about ourselves now for another 15 minutes, and instead follow the stream upstream, and that is always the education. And at the apex of education is the university campus. And I can guarantee you, I'm an area expert on this, they have not had a come to Jesus moment. If we don't change the university, we don't change the culture. And in fact, the university is doing a better job changing the church culture than the church is for us. And I can tell you why. If you go to church and you're a regular churchgoer, let's say weekly, that's only 30% of Americans. If you want to say almost weekly, it's 39%. But exactly 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled in the university. And if you go to church every week, you get 52 sermons a year. You get 60 sermons in your first month as a freshman. Now tell me who has the ears of the future.
Yeah. Now, what I've heard you say, and this is a great way to capture, I think, what you just said, or summarize what you said politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from the university or education. And so it helps us to see the primary role. I mean, really, when we talk about education, we're talking about discipleship. Young people are being discipled by our education system. And now you were earlier characterizing me as an oppressor, and I had a question about that. Like, I'm half white, actually. The other half of me is POC, right? Or maybe AAIP, Asian. Yeah. So does that give me some? Right. I'm part of the oppressed as well, aren't I?
Yeah, so you've got, I guess your wife is partly an oppressor of you on Tuesdays, and on Mondays you're the oppressor of her.
Oh, Corey, he does not need to hear that. That is not what he needs.
I'll be citing Corey Miller in our home. But it just as we talk about this, it just shows the absurdity of this kind of thing. Right. Okay, let's get to the last part of the book, which you just started to mention, and it's how we should respond. Okay, so we are in, and I hate to say it, I'm not a doomsdayer, I'm not pessimistic, because I think we serve a risen Jesus who is alive today. The gates of hell will not prevail against God's church. But it does seem like we're battered. We're in bad shape. And my assessment and our assessment of the current American evangelical church is that we are just so anti-intellectual. But part of what you're suggesting in terms of how we respond is essentially we've got to get intellectual. So I guess here's my first question is, okay, how do we overcome? I guess number one, what are you recommending? What should our response be? And then secondly, if it is intellectual engagement, how do we overcome the deep, significant anti-intellectual bent of so many churches and so many Christians in the U.S.?
Oh, gosh, good questions. 30 years ago, Mark Knoll wrote a book almost this month called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. And the scandal was laid out in the first line, and that is there's not much of an evangelical mind. So Bertrand Russell, the atheist, was alleged to have quipped, the average Christian would rather die than think. In fact, they do, right? So the Christians have a happy heart and, good hands. They like to have worship nights and feel God's presence. And they like to have good food pantries, but they excommunicated the head of Christ, and precisely at the point where they never should have, at the university. And so I'm calling for a third revolution, and that is, guys, this is not rocket science. This is basically following Jesus. Jesus didn't invite us. He commanded us to love God with our mind. So if you want to follow Jesus, then follow Jesus, not just with the hands, not just with the heart, but also with the head. And our apologetics verse, 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 and so forth, is be ready. You got to be ready to give an answer for the reason, head, for the hope in the heart, and do it with gentleness and respect with the hands. You have the head, the hand, and the hearts. If you want to be a fully following Christ apprentice, you need to begin loving God with your mind. And if that's foreign to you, well, then you need to get with the program and be apprenticed by Jesus. I can't underscore this because you're right. We are at a problem today. Let me just read some stats really quick. Most of your audience is probably familiar with this, but the biblical worldview surveys that have been taken over the last couple of years out of Arizona Christian University, on some basic common sense stuff. Your audience might be, well, what does it mean? How are they doing these surveys, first of all? Well, it includes things like belief in God's existence, all humans need a savior, Jesus is the only way to salvation, the Bible is God's word and reliable in all that it teaches, absolute truth exists, grounded in God, the purpose of life is to love, know, and serve God, and success is understood through faithful obedience to God. Most of those things we would say, oh yeah, common sense, easy. Well, the stats in 2022 said that only 6% of Americans hold a biblical worldview. A year later, only 4% did. I guess the good news is that pastors hold a biblical worldview at 37%. And the really good news that we can really throw a party over now is that evangelical, non-denominational pastors hold a biblical worldview at 51 to 57%. Yay, just over half of our pastors in evangelical churches hold a biblical worldview. And we wonder why we are not preparing our people for this culture. And we wonder why we're not preparing the parents who can prepare their students. And both of them are working full-time now, whether because of a standard of living, whether because ideological feminism has creeped into the church as well, whether because of choices we've made as a nation, creating this hyperinflation requiring both parents to work. In any case, we have kicked our kids off down the road to the youth pastor to raise, whose statistics are worse than what I just cited for the senior pastors. And then when we train them up in the way they should go, Proverbs says, They get conscripted to work for the other side. That's not what the scripture says, but that's what's happening because parents and grandparents are literally paying for the apostasy of their own children. Pastors, far too many of them, are engaged in skinny jeans and fog machines, and we are more influenced by the sociology and culture than by theology and scripture. Both the pastors need to get back with the program and start following Ephesians 4, 11, and 12 and equipping God's people for the culture we live in. We are no longer in the synagogue. We've been out of the synagogue for a generation. We are in Mars Hill. We have been there since the millennials. We need to be understanding who our audience is. We need to be able to understand what the Greeks are saying to our students. And so there are organizations like yours, like so many other Christian apologetics organizations that offer, another word for it, discipleship, but discipleship of the mind, helping them to understand the worldviews of the culture that we're in so they can better respond to it and interact with it and evangelize it and so forth. We're just not doing that. And consequently, what we are seeing, I gave you the professor statistics. I gave you the pastor statistics. Now, once you start seeing what the kids' statistics are, you're going to be seeing how badly our culture is, what shape we're in. This was 8 years ago. It's worse now. In 2017, a Yale student survey across all colleges, 48% support campus speech codes. That is, there are lexicons at Stanford and Rutgers and other places, words that thou shalt not say without punishment. 81% see words as a form of violence. Not violence is violence, but words are a form of violence. And this is why Charlie Kirk had to go. He was saying bad things against trans. He was erasing their existence. He was murdering them. And so 33% say that physical violence is justified to prevent hate speech. That's 1 in 3 kids on the campus. Well, I'm glad there's not a lot of hate speech. 66% say hate speech is anything a student believes to be considered hurtful to a particular person. And where do they get these hate ideas? From the professors, who are now scared of their students. The whole thing is a mess, and we need a Jesus revolution, a third revolution, to jump back into the universities and reclaim these universities. Impossible, people say. I say, no, no, no. So I interviewed Al Mohler. And I said, Al, give me something. You took a liberal Southern Baptist seminary and you turned it around. How'd you do that? And then I look at Alvin Plantinga, the philosopher's philosopher, who started the Wake to bring in evangelical philosophy into mainstream so that we have a Normandy-like beachhead that we've established. We can take entire disciplines, entire institutions. We need to reclaim these institutions. And that's for the minority of us that are going into the university. But for the majority, for pastors and parents and leaders, they need to be training their kids for the poisonous ideology coming out of the universities.
Yeah. And I think, parents listening to you, Corey, can think, okay, how do I do this? I'm a mom with 3 kids. Whoever's listening right now, I'm working 9 to 5. I'm doing the best I can, kind of thing. And I think one thing in your book that I think can help parents to recenter and think even about what they can start to do in their own home is, you talk towards the end of the book about parents' responsibility to rear our children, and those statistics about the Christian worldview, they're not good for us as parents. And what you talk about in the book is that only a small percent of us Christian parents are actually reading the Bible that we say is the most important book that's ever been written, and yet we don't read it. And so if we don't read it, we're not going to read it to our kids. And if we don't read it to our kids, then our kids aren't going to learn God's view of the world and of us as humans and all everything we've been talking about. And so I think it starts with, as parents, we just start reading the Bible ourselves and taking our faith seriously as a faith of knowledge. And then that we see, okay, if nothing else, I'm going to pass this knowledge on to my kids. And then what you're describing in, making a change in culture is that at home, we start developing a Christian worldview seriously for ourselves and for our kids. And then inoculating our kids to the bad ideas that they're going to hear out in the culture. And we start doing that at home. But we have to teach them truth first. And then we talk about a lot on the podcast. We start slowly exposing them to the lies of the culture. And so they're armed with truth, but then they also are aware of, these are some of the lies that I'm going to hear. And I've learned how to think through those. And so it isn't that they go out to the university and it's the first time they've heard some of this stuff. No, we've already been working on inoculating them in our homes as well.
Yeah, and I think I could make this a little bit easy. I think you're right on. We need to be about getting back in Scripture and devotion to God ourselves and educate ourselves because the Christian faith is a knowledge tradition. Are we wanting to know God or are we not? And how much do we love our children? Enough to sacrifice them to the gods of Molech, which is what happens when we send them off to these secular baptismal fonts unprepared, or do we want to train them up? And so we've made it easy for parents. We have a new division over the last couple of years that we have developed called RC Press, and you can go onto our website, and we take the best of Christian scholars in the evangelical world, and we have them, instead of their 500-page book, we ask them to give it to us in 25 pages at the 11th grade reading level. And so Steve Meyer, the head of intelligent design, he's written 3 books from biology, physics, and chemistry, and helped him to get on the Joe Rogan program. We said, Steve, no one is going to want to read your dumb 500-page books. Chuckle, chuckle. But give it to us in 25 pages at the 11th grade reading level and we'll make you famous. And so he did. J.P. Moreland, same thing. Other authors, same thing. In all the classical areas of apologetics, in suffering and evil, to Bible reliability, to science and faith, to the new cultural apologetics. And you can't do cultural apologetics if you don't understand cultural Marxism, because that's where we're at. And so in the booklets on race, class, sex, gender, ethnicity, and so forth, we have PhDs writing all of those. But an extra qualifier for most of them, because of the woke expectation that they have to have had lived experience, the booklet on trans, who wrote the 200-page book on trans, who did her master's and PhD on the topic, is also former trans. 25 pages, 11th grade reading level. The one on homosexuality, PhD, former lesbian. The one on Is Christianity a White Man's Religion? Again, written by a doctorate, by someone who is black, and he's not just formerly black, he's still black. But we provide these booklets, and they are free if you give us your email address on our website so we can send you our monthly newsletter or propaganda. You can download all the PDFs for free. If you want them to fit on your iPhone, for digital, a small fee for that. Or if you want them printable, I take my Wednesday morning guys Bible study through that. When we finish a book of the Bible, I take them through 2 of our booklets. Sean McDowell uses these for one of his apologetics classes. Purdue professors across the street use these for their brown bag lunches with faculty gatherings. So these are intended to be written by the best of our scholars at the 11th grade reading level, in print or digital, and they're currently all being translated into Portuguese and Spanish as well. You can go on our website. We've got about 60 of those booklets, not 16, but 60. Parents, take advantage.
That is perfect, because I was gonna ask, like, okay, you've got parents, pastors, educators right now listening, and I'm hoping they're feeling a little bothered. I think what you've done here is a real service. And we need to be bothered by this. We need to be bothered we need our eyes open to what's going on in the universities where we're sending our kids. We need to be bothered by it, because that is often what it's going to take to motivate us to do something. And I was thinking of asking you, hey, what can we do? You've given us a very practical step here, Corey, and that is go to Ratio Christi's website. Here you've got some tools. These are resources that are condensed and translated for normal people. You don't need a PhD to take advantage of these things, but that what you gave right there is a very practical tool that a parent can get on, get the resource, and start educating themselves so that they can then equip their kids. And then the other thing that people need to do is you need to get this book, The Progressive Miseducation of America, subtitled Confronting the Cultural Revolution from the Classroom to Your Community. Written by Corey, great resource and a wake-up call for the church. Corey, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, guys.
MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. Through your generous financial partnership with MAVEN, you are having an impact on the lives of students and families across the country. To become a monthly partner, visit maventruth.com and click on the donate button.